Track 2.
So, how can I help you?
Well, I'm really worried about how I'm going to cope with university life. I feel like I don't know what's going on.
Don't worry, Sondra. Most undergraduates feel like this in their first week.
Well, maybe if I knew the campus a bit better, that might help.
Do you have a map of the campus?
Yes, I was given one during orientation week, but to be honest, I don't really understand it.
Well, let's look at it together. OK, we are here now in Dalton House. Opposite this building is the Arts Block, where you'll find the computers. The computer rooms are open from 9 a.m. till 10:30 p.m. weekdays, but closed on the weekends.
Are there no other computers on campus?
There are a few in the library that are available throughout the year, except Sundays. To get to the library, you keep going down University Lane, past the science block on your left. Opposite the science block are the chemistry labs, and the library is just on the right, next to Lab B.
Fine.
Another important building is the Students' Union. Turn left into Newton Drive. There are some trees and a little outside cafeteria. The Students' Union is just behind this. One thing I must check, have you sorted out your fees yet?
Well, I filled in a direct debit form, so I suppose that means everything is fine.
Probably, but you should go to the finance office just to make sure. It's at the end of Newton Drive. You'll need some identification, your passport or student ID.
And is there a bank on campus?
Yes, it's open normal banking hours and there is a 24-hour cash machine. The bank's in Isaac Street, which runs parallel to University Lane, where we are now. Go past Lecture Hall B and the bank is opposite, just before you get to Lecture Hall A.
Great.
Probably the best thing to do is to walk around and familiarise yourself with everything. Don't worry, it won't take you long to settle in.
I'm sure you're right. I feel a lot better.
I also need you to fill in this form for the tutorial file. Take it away with you and then make an appointment to see me again and we'll go over it. My telephone number is on the form here at the bottom of the page. You can ring me any time between 9 a.m. and 3:30 p.m. from Monday to Friday, except on a Thursday when I'm only available in the morning.
Track 3.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Stop Smoking Now. You're all here today because you've decided to stop smoking. However, making the decision to stop is just the first step. Yet if you follow these guidelines, no matter how tough it may be to begin with, rest assured you will be on your way to becoming what you want to be, an ex-smoker. The first thing to remember is that there is not only one way. What I'll give you today are various methods you can choose from. They all work and they can all help. The first method I would recommend is based on something we all have, but in different degrees, namely willpower. Of course, just making the decision to stop is an enormous act of willpower alone. But what exactly does this mean? It means having a strong mind, waking up every morning and telling yourself that you will not have that cigarette, no matter how much you may want one. To do this successfully, you really have to be determined to stay focused. You need to be in the right frame of mind. But this isn't as easy as it may sound, and it may mean doing other things to take your mind off having that cigarette, particularly when the urge is strong. I found that different things can help you do this, like taking up a hobby, or having a smoking buddy, someone you can phone up when the going gets tough, a friend who can help you think about something else. Remember that each time you don't have a cigarette, you will feel better and stronger. Of course, this method does not work for everyone, but there are other ways to help keep you on track. Another way is to use smoking aids. There are many types, so find one that suits you best. Take, for example, nicotine patches. You put one on every day and it gives you a controlled nicotine dose. Basically, you keep reducing the amount until your body stops craving nicotine. As your body gets used to less nicotine, you may experience withdrawal symptoms. Don't worry about feeling embarrassed people will notice, because many nicotine patches are see-through. So, where do you get them? Well, you can buy them from your local pharmacy or supermarket. You can also ask your GP for a prescription.
Track 4.
Another method that is becoming more popular is alternative therapies. Giving up smoking is not only difficult for your body, but also your mind, as the emotional stress can be really severe. One therapy that springs to mind is acupuncture. This can help you relax, calm you down, making you much more likely to want to give up. Acupuncture usually lasts between 50 to 90 minutes. As your body and mind become stronger, you should need fewer sessions. The good thing about acupuncture is that it takes harmful toxins caused by smoking out of your body. And I'm sure you'll all like this, it does not increase your appetite. So giving up smoking using this method means you won't put on weight. It can take as few as 5 acupuncture sessions to cure you, but of course this depends on the type of person you are. I suppose one of the biggest advantages of using this method is that there are almost no withdrawal symptoms because it works from the inside. What I mean by this is that acupuncture takes away your wanting to smoke, and this feeling, on top of the feeling of calmness, stays with you after the treatment is over. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter which method you choose. What's important is that you make the decision and then stick to it no matter what. If you give up, think of the money you'll be saving. There is no better time to start than today. You can kick the habit for good.
Track 5.
Now, I'm going to give you a topic, and I want you to speak about it for 1 to 2 minutes. First, you have 1 minute to think about what you're going to say, and you can make some notes. Here is your topic. I want you to describe an older person who has had an influence on your life. Okay?
Well, I think a person who had most influence is probably my grandfather. He is important for me. He always helped me. I did not meet him really because he is my grandfather. So actually, he was always in my life. Really, we did many things together. He played with me always, and sometimes read me story. Actually, I like reading books because it can help me to relax. I'm reading a good book now. It's about this woman, and she remember her life. Actually, it's a bit of a love story, but I'm liking it very much.
Track 6.
Hi there, Sang-min. What have you been up to?
I've just been to a tutorial. Weren't you two supposed to attend?
Yes, we were. But I had an essay to finish and Julianne offered to help.
Did we miss much?
Well, I thought it was quite interesting. It was all about spending habits among undergraduates. It was based on recent research done by a PhD student studying behavioral psychology.
Oh, yes. I remember being interviewed by him about what I usually spend my money on.
And what did you say?
Well, most of my money, probably around 75%, goes on basic living, paying rent, food costs, and of course, university fees.
I'm the same, except my food bill is higher.
We are all in the same boat here. Virtually all my money goes on that too, but I also spend a lot of money on textbooks, between 100 and 120 pounds a month, usually more. Realistically, it's closer to 150 pounds.
That explains why you get such good marks. Another aspect of the interview was students' use of credit cards, with a particular focus on how students manage these.
In my case, not very well. I always end up spending more than I plan to. It's too easy to use.
Surely that must be the point, that students are given credit cards too easily before they've learned how to use them. And the number of credit cards some students get, it's frightening. The average is about 3 cards.
Not only cards. students need to learn how to manage money too. And this is what the interview's meant to find out. By comparing and contrasting all the data, the root causes of student spending could be highlighted.
And the effects this has on students, I'd imagine, would be more negative than positive.
Perhaps, but this was the other part of what the student was trying to achieve. You also need to study the effects to find answers.
Track 7.
But I think it all goes back to how we were taught to manage money when we were children.
That's true. Our behavior now is closely related to the childhood environment and what we learned from that.
But how far back should we go? When do children really begin forming an understanding of what money means?
I've read that children between 3 and 5 can understand what's right and wrong. That's when they can learn concepts like sharing. At the age of 6, most children can understand the value of money.
This suggests that if parents offered practical advice to their children at an early age, it could have a very positive impact on their spending habits in later life.
It basically comes down to 3 areas. The first one is allowance. Parents should not try to focus on how much money they give their children, but rather on what they need.
Needs are difficult to define, so parents need to resist the urge to give in when their children say, "I want."
For me, the only way to teach children the difference between needs and wants is to give them a practical allowance. If my parents had not done that for me when I was younger, I don't think I would be able to handle the money they give me now.
True. The second thing I think is important is saving.
Can you explain a bit more?
Well, basically, parents need to introduce their children to personal finance. If we are expected to deal with money now, then we have to learn when we're younger.
I see what you mean. And it could be in quite simple ways, like by helping them to open their own savings account.
There's one more area I think is vital.
What's that?
It's buying. We spend excessively on credit cards because we don't know how to control money. We almost need to learn how and what to buy, which is why parents should allow their children to participate in this. If they want something expensive, like a new pair of trainers, then they could be encouraged to save a bit of their allowance.
And parents could also promise to help by saying that they will pay the rest if the child, at the end of their period of saving, still does not have enough. Track 8. 1.
Application. Apply.
2.
Association. Associate.
3.
Communication. Communicate.
4.
Concentration. Concentrate.
5.
Direction. Direct.
6.
Education. Educate.
7.
Examination. Examine.
8.
Formation. Form.
9.
Information. Inform.
10.
Instruction. Instruct.
11.
Operation. Operate.
12.
Organization. Organize.
13.
Population. Populate.
14.
Production. Produce.
15.
Reaction. React.
16.
Relation. Relate.
17.
Situation. Situate.
18.
Variation. Vary.
Track 9.
The Department of Energy denied claims that a change in its energy policy is being debated in light of fresh evidence of global warming. A government minister denied that a decision has been taken to back technologies for harnessing the power of renewable and sustainable sources of energy, such as wind and solar power. The department claims that renewables are unable to generate enough power to meet growing energy requirements economically. Campaigners for the environment point out that, given the predicted steep rise in energy consumption, it is more important than ever that the government takes steps to reduce demands for conventional sources of energy, like fossil fuels, which are damaging to the environment.
Track 10.
Good afternoon, Dr. Dartford speaking.
Good afternoon, Dr. Dartford. It's Miranda Smith here.
Oh, hello, Miranda. How can I help you?
I'm really sorry, but I couldn't come to your lecture on the government's waste strategy yesterday because I was feeling ill. My essay has to be handed in 2 weeks' time, and I'm worried I might have missed something important. I really don't like it when I miss lectures, especially when I need the information for an essay.
Well, try not to worry. You can't help being sick. How about if I give you a quick summary of the main points?
That'd be great, thanks. Just let me get a pen. Right, I'm ready.
To begin with, I stressed the importance of us reusing and recycling waste in the future. I made particular reference to the UK, which at the moment only recycles about 8% of household waste. The levels of industrial and commercial waste are much higher. It's frightening how much waste factories produce on a daily basis, but that's not all. The fact is that not only is this rate of recycling well below government targets, but it's at a much lower rate than many other European countries, which means Britain is just not keeping pace with the rate of growth in household waste.
That's pretty worrying, isn't it?
It certainly is. What is more, we need to understand that if we are to achieve a more rational and sustainable use of our resources in this country, then we have to develop a fundamental change in the way we think about waste.
That won't be easy. What suggestions did you propose?
Just give me a second. Let me check my notes. OK, got it. Basically, there are a couple of ways this could be achieved. One of these is for more household waste to be separated.
You mean separated into things like newspapers, tins, and stuff like that?
Yes, that's the idea. Then this separated waste would obviously need different forms of collection by local councils, but most importantly, it will require an expansion in the market for collected materials, which is one of the major barriers to increased recycling. New government targets have also been set for recycling or composting 30% of household waste by 2010.
But that's almost a 4-fold increase, isn't it?
It is indeed. Rather a frightening figure, whichever way you look at it.
Track 11.
As you say, it's a 4-fold increase, but my guess is it won't stop there. You must remember the previous government found that setting targets is one thing, but if the practical policies are not in place, nothing will happen.
So what is the government planning to do about all this waste?
Well, apparently they're going to publish a final strategy setting out a range of policies to start and sustain the necessary changes. But the interesting part for me was that it's not only up to the government. To say we need more recycling is a simple message, but, and here is the crux of the matter, there's another one that isn't getting enough attention.
Really? What's that?
It's quite obvious, really. It's us, the general public. We have to reduce the amount of waste we make. It's our responsibility. Did you know that every hour enough waste is produced to fill the Sydney Opera House, and the rate is increasing?
Actually, now you mention it, I remember reading somewhere that the reason for all this waste is our increasing wealth and the changes to our lifestyles. I guess it's quite obvious when you really think about it. I mean, it's things like shops and supermarkets selling more pre-packaged foods and ready-made meals.
Convenience is the key. People simply want their lives to be more convenient. And there's also technological change that brings pressure to make people change their domestic appliances for newer models.
I never thought about that, but you're right. And I'm just as guilty. I threw out my old stereo so I could have a better model, even though there wasn't really anything wrong with the old one.
You see, you're a classic example that changing our present throwaway culture is going to be an enormous challenge. At the end of the day, consumers will have an important role to play. It could all boil down to their choices and their willingness to support recycling by sorting their waste and accepting more recycled products.
Track 12. 1,
Importance.
2,
Futile.
3,
Solution.
4,
Targets.
5,
Public.
6,
Household.
7,
Conventional.
8,
Convenience.
9,
Policies.
10,
Appliance.
11,
Fundamental.
12,
Sustain.
13,
Domestic.
14,
Sustainable.
15,
Recycles.
16.
Propose.
Track 13. 1,
The UK has less recycled household waste and rather more industrial and commercial waste.
2,
The government needs to start and sustain changes in refuse collection.
3,
The general public needs to think more about recycling and develop a fundamental change in the way they get rid of their domestic waste.
4,
He made the suggestion that a sustainable solution required an expansion in the market.
Track 14.
Good morning. As part of our lecture series on everyday health issues, today's talk is on tiredness. We shall look at the main issues in turn, as well as some of the main research that has been carried out in this field. Firstly, it is clear that tiredness is on the rise. No official data exists on the rate of people reporting to doctors with recurring tiredness, but it's a very common complaint. Research suggests that people are not relaxing properly and often work when they do not have enough energy. Furthermore, products to boost energy are also on the rise. Sales of so-called energy drinks loaded with caffeine and sugar have grown by 23% over the last year. And this is not the only instance of an increase in products claiming to boost energy. Guarana, a herbal stimulant, can now be found in everything from chocolate bars to tea bags. Now let's examine what it is that's making people so tired. Dr. Liebhold, a Sydney GP, has done extensive research into this, and he believes that financial pressures, not taking holidays, and not having time off when you become ill due to fear of losing your job are all common causes. Some of the other suggested causes are low oxygen levels in offices, poor diet, or illness. The problem is that tiredness is a symptom of just about every kind of illness, which makes tracking down the cause all the more difficult. The next question to ask is, are people getting enough sleep? Dr. Mansfield from Melbourne's Epworth Sleep Centre, who specialises in sleep disorders, says insomnia often arises when people are going through a stressful period. Mansfield often needs to re-educate people in how to get off to sleep. He recommends keeping your body clock regular by going to bed and rising at similar times every day, and not drinking too much caffeine. And there is some truth in the old story about having a glass of hot milk before bed. Milk contains the amino acid tryptophan, which has been shown to help induce sleepiness. Turning to the question of why we need sleep, researchers are still trying to answer this fundamental question. Sleep deprivation experiments have shown that after 14 days without sleep, rats will lie down and die. and after only 3 days sleep loss, humans get confused, forgetful, and start having hallucinations. So whatever sleep does, it is important.
Track 15.
Let's now look at the medical aspect of the problem. If ongoing tiredness is present, a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome might be considered. University of New South Wales expert Professor Lloyd says that by a process of elimination, researchers have tracked the site of this problem to the brain, and Lloyd believes it is a problem with the proper functioning of the brain rather than any structural abnormality. The good news, however, is that most chronic fatigue sufferers make a full recovery within 6 months of being diagnosed. The final area to examine is diet. Sydney-based naturopath Leonie McMahon believes inadequate breakfast is a common cause of tiredness and recommends increasing the consumption of protein at breakfast.
Track 16.
However, not all researchers feel the same way. Trent Watson of the Dietitians Association is not convinced by McMahon's theory, explaining that our bodies don't really like to burn protein as a fuel, so it doesn't really contribute to energy levels. Carbohydrates, however, found in fruit, breads and pastas, are a more common fuel. Anyone following a rigidly high-protein diet with low carbohydrates, even if they are operating at low intensity during the day, could subject themselves to fatigue because they just don't have the carbohydrate stores, Watson says. In general, a good way to stay energised from a dietary point of view is to eat red meat, green leafy vegetables and whole grains. These foods give red blood cells the building blocks for optimum performance in their role of delivering oxygen to muscles. To sum up, tiredness is a health problem on the increase, and there continues to be much debate surrounding its causes and remedies. Now, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Track 17.
This week's Our World program comes from Canada, where Usha Lee McFarling sends this report on how global warming is affecting the behavior of polar bears and creating problems for the town of Churchill, which depends on the bears for tourism.
The Hudson Bay polar bears are an unusual group. They spend half their year living on the frozen sea ice. And in a normal year, around springtime, when the weather gets warmer, the bears move onto land as the sea ice begins to melt. Once they have done this, their lives enter a new phase, which involves a change in their metabolism. They don't hibernate, but their bodies slow down because they won't eat for the next 6 months. During this half of the year, they lose hundreds of pounds in weight. Each autumn, as the temperature falls, the bears migrate past the small town of Churchill, waiting for the Hudson Bay to freeze over again. When it has, the bears go back onto the sea ice. Now they can build up their fat reserves by feeding on seals. They survive because the surface of the Hudson Bay is normally frozen from mid-October through to mid-April. During these months, the bears sleep on ice floes and swim in the frigid waters. Normally, that means millions of dollars for the town of Churchill, which earns money by taking tourists into the tundra to see the bears as they pass by the town. However, recently the weather has been warmer and the bears' behavior has changed. The warm weather prevents the sea from freezing, and so the hungry bears come into town looking for food.
Track 18.
Having spent 6 months without food, the bears are at their most hungry and dangerous. Starving bears often lose their natural wariness and wander into town. If a town resident spots a bear, they call the Bear Alert Program on 675-BEAR, day or night, to report a bear in town. Officer Richard Romaniuk and his crew will then shoot the bear with a sleeping dart. It will then be taken to Polar Bear Prison. Sometimes the officers capture 4 bears in a day. To keep the animals from associating humans with food, they are not fed in prison. The bears are kept locked up until the sea freezes. Once the sea has frozen again, the bears are airlifted by helicopter and flown back to return to their natural winter habitat. The program has 2 objectives. The first is to protect people from the bears. The second is to protect the bears from the people.
Track 19.
The town of Churchill has good reason to look after the bears. Rough estimates indicate the province of Manitoba earns in the region of $300 million each year from bear tourism. Bears are the backbone of our economy, said town manager Darren Ottaway. While Ottaway is concerned about an abundance of hungry bears coming to town in the short term, he is even more worried that global warming may mean no bears here at all one day. For 3 weeks during bear season, sleepy Churchill blooms as about 15,000 tourists stream through town, hoping to get close-up views of the animals from caravans of heated tundra buggies. Several chartered jets unload bear gazers at the Churchill airport each day. Hotels and restaurants closed during the bleak winter filled to capacity. Polar bears are not currently an endangered species. Their total population is estimated to be from 22,000 to 27,000. But the 1,200 Hudson Bay bears could face what scientists call a local extinction. They could produce fewer cubs and eventually die out. Officials and business leaders in Churchill have already begun planning for alternative ways of generating income. Ottaway is promoting whale watching and is delighted that Japanese tourists are willing to brave the bone-chilling cold of winter to view the northern lights. It's super news for us, Ottaway said of the potential Japanese tourist boom. Warmer weather, Ottaway said, could also extend the shipping season on Hudson Bay and attract more filmmakers. The science fiction classic Iceman was filmed nearby, as well as an upcoming film, The Snow Walker. When people talk about climate change, you have to look at the benefits too, Ottaway said. Others, however, feel differently. The bears have been in our community for years, said one resident. They're like neighbors, and everybody ought to be helping to make sure their natural life cycle can be maintained.
Track 20. 1,
Area.
2,
Category.
3,
Community.
4,
Economy.
5,
Enormous.
6,
Estimate.
7,
Minor.
8,
Phenomenon.
9,
Potential.
10,
Region.
11,
Resident.
12.
Strategy.
Track 21. 1,
The Hudson Bay polar bears are an unusual group.
2,
Sometimes the officers capture 4 bears in a day.
3,
The town of Churchill has good reason to look after the bears.
4,
Polar bears are not currently an endangered species.
5,
The bears have been in our community for years.
Track 22.
My favorite animal is a camel. It is quite a large animal, and one thing about it that makes it easy to recognize is that it has a hump, either 1 or 2, depending on the type. I think I saw my first camel when I went to visit my uncle. He lives in a town where camel racing is really popular, so you see camels everywhere, sometimes just walking in the streets. I really like camels because, for me, they move so gracefully when they walk, and I've always found it fascinating that they can survive for long periods without water. I feel the camel is an important symbol of my country because I guess many people associate camels with my country. It's also an important animal for food. I mean, we drink camel milk. And, of course, racing camels make lots of money for their owners, so there's an economic aspect as well.
Track 23.
I think there is a dual responsibility for protecting animals. Firstly, it is the responsibility of governments to make sure this happens. There should be laws to ensure, for example, that whales and dolphins are protected. I remember reading somewhere that quite a few dolphins get killed because they get caught in fishing nets. Of course, we, the general public, also have an important part to play in this. As far as dolphins are concerned, we can make sure we only buy tinned fish that is dolphin-friendly, and what I mean by this is that the correct fishing methods have been used. I feel quite strongly that animals like dolphins must be protected because if we don't do this, dolphins could be in danger of becoming extinct, and that would be a real shame. There would be other effects too, like to the tourist industry. I mean, if you think about it, in many countries like New Zealand and Australia, tourists pay to go and look at the dolphins and even swim with them, which must be quite an unforgettable experience.
Track 24.
Good morning and welcome to this series of lectures on man interfering with nature. This morning we are going to look at the issue of cloning. I'd like to begin by looking at some examples of animals that have been cloned before moving on to looking at how cloning is defined. The first example I'd like to talk about is Idaho Gem, who was the very first mule to be cloned. Mules are a combination of horse and donkey. Idaho Gem is an identical copy of his brother Taz, who is a racing champion. Thus, we can make the conclusion here that he was cloned to follow in his brother's footsteps. The next example I'd like to refer to is Cece, which stands for copycat. Like her name suggests, she was the first cloned kitten. Interestingly, Cece was created in a laboratory in the state of Texas by the very same scientists who made Dolly the sheep in Scotland. Cece is physically identical to her mother Rainbow, and what is important about this is that it has opened the doors for people to clone their pets in the future. Now, the last animal example I'd like to look at today is the pig. In 2001, 5 piglets were born, all female. They were created by a firm who claimed that their birth is an important step for medicine. The idea is that pig organs and cells could be used in human transplants because the pigs have been cloned without a certain cell. This cell is a vital link because it is the one in human beings that is responsible for making the body reject donor organs. This means that not only is the transplant operation unsuccessful, but the patient's life could be at risk. Now, I'd like to discuss some of the current definitions of cloning.
Track 25.
One kind of cloning, the kind commonly found in plants, occurs when plants reproduce themselves around the original plants, known as the parent plants. New plants can then grow. This is quite a natural process by which plants can form more of the same type of plant. Though you may not be aware of it, another type of cloning happens quite naturally in your body when old cells need to be replaced. Cells in your body split into 2 and make new chromosomes, and it is the chromosomes that contain our genes. Embryo splitting is another form of cloning, which can happen quite naturally when cells split to form 2 identical twins.
You may then be asking yourself what all the fuss is about. If cloning does in fact happen naturally, because sometimes man can interfere with nature and it can work. Take embryo splitting as an example. Now, this type of cloning is quite common in farming, and it is used to breed new bulls and cows. Embryos are placed into foster mother cows, and these then grow into calves. And though some may consider this to be artificial, it has been going on for the last 10 years with relatively few problems. Now, the last type of cloning I'd like to mention is perhaps the most controversial. This type of cloning is called nuclear transfer, and it is when the nucleus of a cell is put into an egg of another animal that is genetically the same. This is done in a laboratory, and after about 5 or 6 days, the embryo is implanted into a donor mother, which is how Dolly the sheep was made. One argument in favor of cloning is that it can help in medicine, as in the case of pigs being used in transplant operations. It is true that many people can wait for up to a year for a new kidney, and then still run the risk of their bodies rejecting the donor kidney. But will using pig organs really be the solution? To answer this question, I'd like to take a look at some responses to the whole idea of using pig organs in humans. Neil Blackwood, who works for the company that cloned the 5 piglets, described it as a major medical advance that could solve the global problem of a lack of organs to use in transplant operations. This could lead in the future to saving human lives. Sheila Halliday, a leading transplant surgeon, does not share his view. She believes that although it is possible to use pig organs in humans, there are very real dangers. Halliday points out that diseases and infections could be passed from pig to human. Of course, she does not yet know this for certain, which is why Halliday strongly advocates that more scientific research be done. She firmly believes pig organs should not be used in human operations until these findings are made public.
Track 26.
Good morning. How can I help you?
I'm thinking of taking a year off university next year, and I'd like to travel around Europe.
Okay then. Do you have any idea where you'd like to go?
Well, I was thinking of starting in France and then working my way up to Eastern Europe, possibly going as far as Slovakia.
Well, there are a number of ways you can do this, and we have various options available. It really depends on your budget and how you'd like to travel.
That's just the thing, really. I've just finished my second year at university, so obviously I'd like to do it in as cheap a way as possible.
That's fine. Could you give me a rough idea of the price range you're looking at?
Realistically speaking, I'm hoping to pay between about £700 and £900. I could stretch to £1,100, but that's really my limit.
How long are you thinking of going for?
About 10 months.
To be honest, you'd be better off travelling for about 7 months, if that's your budget.
OK, that's not too bad. So, how would you suggest I travel?
Well, because of the time limit, I don't think walking is a viable option. Of course, in this day and age, the most convenient way to get around is by flying, particularly if you've got quite a bit you want to see in a short space of time. Saying that, I still think the best way to get around Europe is by train. As a student, you can also get a student rail card, which means cheaper fares.
That sounds brilliant. How do I go about getting a rail card?
Well, if you decide that's what you want to do, then we can organise that all for you. You'll need to fill in a form and provide us with 2 passport photos, and we'll do the rest. It costs about £36 plus about £10 administration costs.
Great. That's really not expensive at all. And what about buses? I was just thinking if I decide to go to places which are a bit more remote.
There are always local buses, but these are not always a good idea. They can be quite unreliable and in some areas quite dangerous because the buses tend to be overcrowded and some of the drivers drive way too fast. So I would suggest you don't do this.
That sounds quite frightening. So what are my options then?
You could hire a car, but it can be expensive. Still, I do think if you're thinking about going to smaller towns and places which are off the beaten track, then hiring a car is by far the better way to do it. You can also look at sharing the costs by hiring a car with someone else.
That's a good idea. I guess I could put a message on the internet.
You could do that. But don't forget that you meet people when you're travelling, and you'll probably find someone who's going to the same place as you are.
That's true. I want to stay in youth hostels, so I'm sure I'll find people who are interested in going to the same places. Oh, one last thing. What about taxis? I was thinking about if I go out at night. I use taxis all the time here.
But taxis abroad are a different story. In certain countries, they're no problem, but by and large, taxi fares are high.
Oh.
If you do go out at night, try walking home, but make sure you don't do this alone. Try and find people to go out with at night or come home at a reasonable time. But if you're staying in youth hostels, you should find plenty of young people to go out with at night.
I'm sure I will.
Track 27.
Now, have you thought about how you'd like to travel to France?
Not really, no.
There are basically 3 ways. You can go by ferry, which leaves every day and night, or there's the hovercraft, which is more pricey, but will get you there quicker, and, of course, you could fly.
Well, I don't think flying is an option for me, as it'll be too expensive. So I suppose I'll choose one of the other 2. It's a pity, really, as I don't fancy the idea of travelling by sea. Last time I did that, I got terribly seasick.
Well, you're in luck then, as at the moment there's a special deal on flights to France. In fact, a plane ticket is now half the price of a ferry ticket, which is usually the cheapest option.
That's great. I'll do that then. I much prefer flying anyway.
I'll need to get some details off you then. Firstly, how will you be paying? Cash, cheque or credit card? If you pay by cheque, you'll need a cheque guarantee card.
I don't have my chequebook with me, so it'll have to be by credit card.
Fine, that's no problem. If you could just sign over here, and then we'll have a look at flight times, and I can sort out a youth travel card for you.
Fine. Oh, can I use your pen, please?
No problem. Now, let's look at times. There is a flight leaving at 9 a.m. and one that leaves half an hour later, or you can choose a later flight at 11:30.
No, I think 11:30 is too late, so I think I'd prefer the flight that leaves after 9. I'm not very good at getting up in the morning.
No problem. Just give me a moment. Right, that's booked for you. Please remember that if you want to change this, you must give 24 hours notice or you will lose your place.
Track 28.
Good morning and welcome to this morning's lecture on transport. What I'll be doing today is comparing forms of transport in different countries to see how forms of transport are affected by factors such as geographical landscape and economic development. My focus will be on countries in South America, Europe and Asia. The first country I'd like to look at is Colombia, which is in South America. This is a country where geography plays an important role. Due to the huge amount of mountains and forests in this country, travelling by air is crucial. I don't know if many of you realise this fact, but Colombia was the first country to establish a commercial airline, and in so doing they made aviation history. Today, there are more than 400 airports in Colombia for domestic flights, which highlights the point I made earlier, that air travel is a vital means of transport in this country. Colombia also has a road network of about 48,000 kilometres, linking Colombia to Venezuela and Ecuador. Transport by road is important for trade as well as tourism. Apart from this, there is also a railway system, but it is in need of modernisation. The other means of transport is by steamers, with the Magdalena being the main waterway. Now let's turn to Colombia's neighbour, Venezuela. Once again, we see that internal flights are an important means of transport, as like Colombia, Venezuela has remote areas where flying is the easiest means of travelling from A to B. Trains are not popular, and most of the railway lines are in the highlands, as this is where the iron ore mines are. Trains are an efficient means of transporting the iron ore from the mines to the factories. Thus we can see how transport and the economy are interrelated. Ships are also used extensively in this country, and there are many ports, the main seaports being Puerto Cabello and Guanta. Turning now to Europe. Belgium is a country that boasts one of the most compact railway systems worldwide. Inland waterways, or canals, are also an important means of transport, transporting both freight and people. Belgium also has the third largest seaport in the world, namely Antwerpen. Air travel is also important, although this is not linked to geographical terrain, as is the case in the South American countries we've already looked at. Next, I'd like to look at the United Kingdom. Like Belgium, the UK has inland waterways around 4,000 kilometres, yet only about 17% of these are used for commercial transport. The main inland port is Manchester, and the chief seaport is London, with Southampton taking second place. Air travel is extensive in this country, and there are around 150 airports, the most famous being Heathrow. However, about 90% of passengers in the UK travel by road.
Track 29.
Finally, I'd like to look at two Asian countries. China is a country which reveals how geographical size affects transport development. Roads and railways are widely used, and this has led to a huge amount of bridges being built, such as the Yangtze Bridge, which is probably the most widely known. The Yangtze Bridge is 1.6 kilometres long and is built on 2 levels. The upper tier is for cars and pedestrians, while the lower is for trains. Railways are especially important, and over 80% of freight and passengers are transported by rail. With such a high proportion of people using trains, it is not surprising that governments in countries like China are prepared to invest in the railway system. Obviously, a fast and effective train service will encourage businesses and the general public to continue using it. The last country I'm going to mention is Japan, which has one of the most advanced transport systems in the world. The railway system is highly developed, and the Tokaido Railway, connecting Tokyo and Osaka, has trains that can travel up to 250 kilometres per hour. Ships are also a vital means of transport in both international and domestic areas. To summarise, we can see that transport varies throughout the world, yet the importance of transport networks, be they air, sea, rail or road, cannot be underestimated.
Track 2.
Hello, and thanks everyone for coming here today. I know it's always a bit stressful going for a job interview, but it's best to be prepared. For any of you who may not know me, my name is Fiona Ogilvie, and my job is to offer guidance and support for students with special needs. Now, you wouldn't be here today if you weren't interested in finding a job in the holidays. So let's get down to it and see what things you need to be looking out for. Most of you, I hope, will be applying for jobs with the companies that have been recommended by the university. The reason for this is that we here at the university already know these companies and have established good working relationships with them. I've also been to visit all of them and checked out the facilities they have to offer. You really need to make informed choices when you're looking for a job and make sure you know before you even get to the interview stage that your needs will be met. But I know that some of you are applying for jobs independently and have looked at companies outside the university recommended list. So for you, it's best to plan ahead and be aware of what it is you may need while you're working. Things that you need to check when you go for an interview are Are there enough toilet facilities, and are these easily accessible? Also, you want to check that all the public areas inside the building are barrier-free, so you can get direct access to these public spaces whenever you need to. And ask about ramps into the building, so you know how many there are and where they are located. These kinds of things are so much more difficult to sort out when you've started work, as they take time. But ramps are an absolute must, so please make sure you know where they are. Another thing you must make sure of is that the lifts have the correct lowered control panels. Ask if all the lifts have this facility or if it's only certain ones. Now, something I think that is often overlooked is working hours. What you want to make sure of is that you get flexi time. This basically means that your working hours are flexible and you can clock on and clock off in times that suit you. Within reason, of course. Most companies do recognise that it takes much longer for someone in a wheelchair to get on and off buses and trains. Public transport can take that much longer, so you need to be organised and prepared. And for those of you lucky enough to own a car, check how many disability parking spaces are available. Remember that it's your right to have a disabled parking space. These also need to be near enough to a wheelchair accessible entrance or ramp. OK, are there any questions before we move on?
Track 3.
Right, let's move on then. Now I want to talk you through the series of visits to companies which we've got planned for next week. On Monday morning, we will be visiting the Lowland Hotel. They have various summer jobs available, working as a receptionist or conference organiser in their busy conference centre, organising and setting up conferences. You need to be prepared for working in an office environment and spending quite a bit of time talking on the telephone. The bus leaves for the hotel at 9 a.m, so make sure you leave yourself plenty of time to get there. When you arrive at the hotel, please gather in the reception area and wait for someone to take you to your first session, which will be a talk. The talk at the hotel will begin at 10 a.m, and then there will be a short tour of the hotel. There will be a light lunch provided, which is usually salads and sandwiches. The next place we'll be visiting will be on Tuesday afternoon. We'll be going to visit a little local company that makes handmade paper and cards. For those of you studying art, this may be just what you're looking for. We'll be taken on a tour of the company which lasts 3 hours. The tour will start at 3:30 p.m, and after that you'll have a chance to meet some of the staff. Tea and coffee will also be provided. We have no trips planned for Wednesday, but on Thursday morning we'll be going to Tobago Travel Agency. This is a very popular choice amongst our students because you can get student discounts on holidays. We've booked a coach for this and it'll leave from outside the refectory at 8 a.m. You'll need to bring a packed lunch for this, so please don't forget. There is a little canteen where you can buy hot and cold food, but this is closed on Thursdays. Friday, we'll be having representatives from all the companies visiting us, so you will have a chance to ask any questions, and of course, put your name down on the list if you're interested in working for them over the summer. This event will take place in the main hall next to the library, and it'll run from 10:30 until 4. I really hope you make the most of this excellent opportunity to not only earn yourself some extra money, but also to gain experience of what it's like to work. And if you'd like to find out more, then please ask some of the students who worked last year. They're all wearing green badges and will be happy to speak to you afterwards.
Track 4. 1.
Most of you, I hope, will be applying for jobs with companies the university has recommended.
2.
Make sure you know before you even get to the interview stage that your needs will be met.
3.
I know that some of you are applying for jobs independently, So for you, it's best to plan ahead and be aware of what you might need.
4.
Ask if all the lifts have this facility or if it's only certain ones.
5.
When you arrive at the hotel, wait for someone to take you to your first session, which will be a talk.
6.
The next place we'll be visiting will be on Tuesday afternoon.
Track 5.
Well, I think research is important for us as individual researchers. We need to know that our ideas and suggestions are valid, but more importantly, it's for others. We cannot prove our ideas effectively unless we look back at the past, to research that has been done before. We then check past evidence with present-day evidence to see if it correlates. So without research being done, ideas will not be made valid.
Track 6.
So, Enrique, have you started your research project on cities yet?
I've done a bit of reading around the topic and made a few notes. But, if I'm honest about it, I really haven't done as much as I'd have liked to because I'm finding it a bit difficult.
You don't know how relieved I am to hear you say that. I feel the same way. I think the key is to be able to make valid research questions.
You're probably right about that. Didn't we have some lectures on how to write research questions? I think it was towards the beginning of the term.
Yes, we did. I've got my notes somewhere in this file. I tell you what, why don't we look at the notes together and then try and come up with some research questions? At least that would be a good starting point. Give us some sense of where we're going with this.
Brilliant idea. Let's get started. Okay. From what I remember, a good research question is all about knowing from the outset what it is you're trying to find out.
Yes. And now that I'm looking at my notes again, I see I've written here that it's to do with understanding and evaluation. So, understanding a particular issue and evaluating any problems around it. And of course, a very important part is not overlooking any research that has already been done. Past research is just as important as what is being done now.
It's a bit, I suppose, like looking at the research that's already been done and seeing if it agrees or disagrees with your own ideas.
Sure, I hear what you're saying. But to do that properly, you have to have a clear idea in your head what your own research question is. And by that, I mean specific areas you want to focus on. Let's face it, there's so much information out there, and we can't possibly include it all in 2,000 words.
Don't remind me. The thought of writing 2,000 words at the moment seems like a huge mountain to climb.
I know, but let's try to make a start. I think we're meant to be identifying what makes a successful city, and also try to explain why there has been such a steady population movement of people from rural to urban areas. But I'm a bit confused because I don't think this is meant to be the main focus of our research.
Perhaps that's why the lecturer said we need to write questions, and that must be our starting point.
Okay, well, what we're investigating is more than simply what elements make a city successful, but we're also trying to offer possible explanations. So, we have two questions. Why do people want to move to cities? And why do people choose to live in them?
Track 7.
Okay then. I think the first issue concerning successful cities must be the economy. People move to cities for better job prospects, and successful cities are cities that have thriving economies.
That's true enough. It does mean that cities can offer good job opportunities, which seems to me to suggest that a city will only be successful if it attracts the right kind of people to work there.
What kind of person are you talking about?
Well, I suppose I'm referring to the skilled labor force. You know, the idea that up-and-coming young people will move to cities, settle there, maybe buy property, and so that city will get the most talented creative minds. But if a city doesn't offer this, then obviously it will lose out, as university leavers will choose elsewhere.
You could be right there. But I also think that when cities encourage businesses to develop, then you obviously have money pouring into the city, which can raise the general standard of living.
So we've definitely got a question worth investigating. But apart from the economic factor, I think another point worth mentioning is the environment.
Sure, we can research areas like the quality of the air, how clean it is, and then there's traffic. Is there too much traffic? How is it controlled? And also the issues of noise pollution and how the city manages its waste. Oh, and I nearly forgot. The environment includes green spaces like parks.
Those are all valid points, but I think you've overlooked the whole issue of beauty.
Beauty? Are you sure? What's beauty got to do with the environment?
Well, don't you think if you were deciding whether or not you would live in a city, your first impressions would be made with your eyes? So, the buildings in a city are really important. If the entire city looks like a concrete jungle, then it's unlikely to make people want to live there, is it? I think successful cities are those which have managed to strike a balance between old buildings and new ones. So, of course, you'd have some buildings reflecting more modern architecture, but others that haven't lost their character and still represent the past.
You're right, actually. I've often thought that buildings tell a story. I mean, you can tell the history of a place by looking at the buildings.
I know exactly what you mean. And let's not forget that the environment includes cultural aspects. So, for example, what's the cultural life like? For me, a successful city will be attractive because it will have lots to offer, like a good nightlife and a wide variety of places to visit in the day, like museums and galleries, places like that.
True, true. My own view is that some cities have an energy about them. They're exciting to be in.
And other cities are the opposite. Well, we've covered so much ground here. But I think there's one final aspect we should research.
What's that then?
The social aspect. Because, let's face it, cities are made up of people.
They are. And surely a successful city would be one where there is a sense of community, a place where people would feel safe and want to raise families in.
This topic is limitless.
Track 8. Welcome to this series of lectures on interpreting contemporary art. This morning, I'd like to look at the whole issue of contemporary art. What it is, how do we interpret it, what are its uses, and does art, in effect, have any advantages or disadvantages for society? I think at this point it's important for me to clarify that I am looking at art from two main perspectives. Firstly, art as something made by and appreciated by individuals, and secondly, art's relationship with society, as it is society that supports, protects, and encourages art. And I'm hoping that this lecture will act as a springboard for you to revisit your own artistic experiences and question your own ideas of what contemporary art means. Throughout this series of lectures, I'll be looking at various examples of art to illustrate my points. However, if at any point I show you an example which is unfamiliar, then please tell me, as it is imperative that you be able to use your past experiences so that you can check to see if your ideas agree with mine. So if you have not seen a particular work of art before, then this will not work. And let me remind you now that at the end of these lectures, you will be given a written assignment
which will consist of a 2,500-word critical essay. This is not an art review, but an analysis of what you think this kind of art means. Okay, so what is contemporary art? Well, my view is that contemporary art reflects a particular time in history. In terms of Western civilization, this is the period that became known as the Renaissance, which began roughly in 1450. Track 9. Welcome to this series of lectures on interpreting contemporary art. This morning, I'd like to look at the whole issue of contemporary art. What it is, how do we interpret it, what are its uses, and does art, in effect, have any advantages or disadvantages for society? I think at this point it's important for me to clarify that I am looking at art from two main perspectives. Firstly, art as something made by and appreciated by individuals, and secondly, art's relationship with society, as it is society that supports, protects, and encourages art. And I'm hoping that this lecture will act as a springboard for you to revisit your own artistic experiences and question your own ideas of what contemporary art means. Throughout this series of lectures, I'll be looking at various examples of art to illustrate my points. However, if at any point I show you an example which is unfamiliar, then please tell me, as it is imperative that you be able to use your past experiences so that you can check to see if your ideas agree with mine. So if you have not seen a particular work of art before, then this will not work. And let me remind you now that at the end of these lectures you will be given a written assignment which will consist of a 2,500-word critical essay. This is not an art review, but an analysis of what you think this kind of art means. Okay, so what is contemporary art? Well, my view is that contemporary art reflects a particular time in history. In terms of Western civilization, this is the period that became known as the Renaissance, which began roughly in 1450. But this becomes confusing as the modern era is also considered to be from 1789, from the time of the French Revolution. Added to this are modern ideas and modern art that developed from 1890. This period has also been called the turn of the century. To try and somehow bring all these periods together, I shall define contemporary art as any art created from 1920 up until the present day. Turning now to the question of whether or not art is useful for society. Well, when we look back at the history of the West, we can see that there has been a tradition, especially in Western Europe, of art that was official. This meant that the government sponsored or subsidized the art. It could be said, therefore, that art has a cultural use, in that it can represent both the culture and history of a country. And let's remember what I said earlier, that this is both the history and culture of a particular time. Now, the disadvantage of this kind of official art is that it tends to be academic. And by that, I mean it is art that requires the person looking at it to be educated in art, at least to some extent. So it seems to me that this restricts this type of art to a particular social group. And whether you agree with this concept or not will depend on if you believe that art should be accessible to everyone. Of course, with the rapid developments in technology and advertising, the television, computer, and various forms of digital media, art has changed. And although there will always be a need for art to be subsidized by governments, we see today art forms that are surviving on individual subsidy. Sometimes this is through the support of wealthy patrons, such as businessmen or famous people. But it also operates on a more simple level. I refer here to the art that is done on walls and in streets, sometimes called amateur art. But it is the art of graffiti, and it is now accepted as an art form in itself. So here we come to what I see as another advantage for society in that art is a means by which people can express their ideas, their feelings. Of course, in the case of graffiti, there is much debate as to whether the advantages outweigh the more negative side, which is when graffiti artists paint on public buildings. This creates unnecessary expense and also damages these buildings, which are meant for public use. We will be looking at some examples of this later on. Now, many critics of contemporary art have pointed to art that is often violent and even obscene. But I would like to suggest that such art is not meant to only shock us. It also has the element of exposure, so it can teach us about the violence in society. This then brings us to another advantage of art. It can raise awareness, help us see things in a different light. The disadvantage of this is that art can be dangerous. What I'm saying here is that if we accept that contemporary art has the power to influence our feelings and attitudes, then we have to accept that art can evoke negative feelings like anger as much as it can give us feelings of hope and peace. But art is, after all, about us, so it can be about our beliefs and our behavior. And as human beings, we possess both positive and negative traits. I'd like to show you some slides now to illustrate what I've been talking about. Track 10.
The best example I can think of is the Mona Lisa. It's really a famous painting, but that's not why I like it. I saw it in the Louvre Museum when I was on holiday last year. Of course, every tourist likes to go and see famous art, but I must admit that I was surprised the effect the painting had on me. There was something about the way her face was painted. She seems to be smiling, but in quite a sad way, and I couldn't decide if she was looking at me or not. I remember standing there for a long time, just staring at that face. I believe that art is quite important because of the way it changes your perspective on things. For me, this means that it helps me see things in a different way. Ultimately, I feel that art not only preserves our history and culture, but can also broaden our horizons and make us see life from a different angle.
Track 11. 1.
February the 9th, 2009.
2.
The 18th of December, 2012.
3.
The 9th of February, 2006.
4.
53882017.
5.
54999-420.
Track 12. 1.
1760.
2.
7630029.
3.
30.
4.
50.
5.
1860.
6.
15.
7.
1550.
8.
80.
9.
13.
10.
2016.
Track 13. 1.
Some of the first more advanced mobile phones were introduced into high street shops in December 2006, just before Christmas.
2.
It would not be true to say that he rode a bicycle from the age of 4 to 40, because when he was 14 he broke his leg, which meant he didn't ride for at least 12 months.
3.
The company forecast that by 2014 there will be at least 120 billion children buying their computer game, an increase of about 19%, which is not as much as they had hoped for.
4. The first satellite was launched in 1958 and there are probably now over 150 still in operation.
5.
He graduated from university in the 1960s and never dreamt that his invention would still be used 16 years later.
6.
On the 18th of November, 98,217 people visited the website and voted for the movie Titanic, first released in 1997.
7.
I'd love you to give me a call sometime. I know you've got my old number, 237-5550, but I've got a new mobile now, so my number's changed to 344-4533.
Track 14.
Good morning. This is Jane Frost with this morning's edition of Wake Up with Frost. As you all know, for the last week we've been running a survey trying to find out what you, the listeners, think is the greatest invention of the last 200 years. The response has been amazing, double the amount we had last year, so thanks to all of you for taking part. We've had about 2,000 responses online and about the same on our phone lines. The lines are now closed, and this morning I can announce what the results were. So, here it is. You, the listeners, have chosen as the greatest technological invention of the past 200 years, and let me not forget to mention that 65% of you voted for this, it's the bicycle. Yes, the bicycle, first invented in 1818, and, would you believe it, the first bicycle was made of wood. The second bicycle had iron wheels. I cannot imagine what that must have been like to ride. It would have kept you fit at any rate. But for me, the best thing about the bicycle was what it did for women's rights. Yes, in the 1890s, it was the bicycle that meant women could change their clothing, start wearing trousers or pantaloons as they were known. Before then, women's clothes had been really uncomfortable, and I'd imagine quite difficult to breathe in. So, thanks to the ordinary bicycle, it was not only the man who wore the trousers in a home. Instead, women could now feel far more equal to their male contemporaries. And I'm sure you'll agree, the bicycle is a great way to get regular exercise, and of course, it's much better for the environment. And today, over 1 billion people all over the world ride bicycles, and for some, it's their only means of getting around from A to B. So, to all you bicycle riders out there, keep up the good work. Coming in a close second with 42% is the computer. I found out something interesting about the computer, which is that really this word first meant someone who did mathematical calculations. Of course, today, with the development of the personal computer, computers are being used for everything from home use to business and even digital photography. I don't know about you, but I can't imagine life without a computer now. I guess closely related to the computer is the internet, and this got 12% of your votes. Maybe, like myself, many of you might think of the internet as being the World Wide Web, but actually the web is only one part of the internet. The internet began as part of the United States military network, but it later began to be used by businesses and academic institutions. Of course, today, the internet has so many uses. We use it for shopping online and entertainment, as well as to find information and send emails. But sadly, there is a darker side to the internet, and some of you have sent me emails about this. Finally, with 5% of your votes, is the radio. We think the radio was invented by Marconi in 1896, and he opened his first radio or wireless factory in the United Kingdom in 1898. In 1906, a man called Reginald Fessenden gave the first radio broadcast from Massachusetts. Ships could hear him at sea, and apparently he played the violin. As yet, listeners, I've spared you from having to listen to my guitar playing. But certainly radio is still important. Let's not forget that it was by radio that the Titanic sent signals to other ships. And with the popularity of TV today, I was secretly pleased so many of you had still placed importance on the radio. So, there you have it, the results of our survey. I think there are still important inventions that were not chosen but deserve a mention. Nuclear power and, of course, communications satellite, something which I am certain will continue to change the face of how we communicate with each other over both long and short distances. In fact, for me, the mobile phone is one of the greatest inventions of the last 200 years, if I think back to my first phone and then I look at what is happening now. Children born today will probably be more likely to have their first experience of the internet on a mobile phone screen rather than a computer monitor. Some of the new mobiles that are now being sold make it just as easy and as quick to find information on the web as on a computer. And let's not forget that mobiles now have digital cameras, word processing facilities, so you can type all your documents, and even personal organisers. I think it's quite possible that the mobile may even replace computers one day.
Track 15.
I really love my little local corner shop. I simply adore being able to shop there, just because it's so convenient. I mean, it's got all the basics: bread, milk, washing up liquid, and other things like that. One of my favourite things is being able to pop down on a Sunday and buy the papers and some fresh bread. I know some of my friends think it's too expensive, but I think it's worth every penny. And I think little shops are such an important part of local life, and so we should support them. I feel really passionately about this because I've seen many small businesses being forced to close because they can't compete with larger chain stores. Anyway, my local store is totally amazing. I certainly couldn't live without it.
Track 16. Well, I usually try and shop at smaller shops as much as possible. If I'm perfectly honest, I just can't stand big supermarkets. They are so impersonal, and I really hate the long queues. There's nothing worse than having to wait in a queue, especially when you're in a hurry. It's such a complete waste of time. I'm also totally disgusted by the way in which larger supermarket chains are taking business away from smaller shops. I'm all for supporting local traders because I think they're incredibly important for the community. Track 17.
Good afternoon and welcome to this special seminar on what I believe is one of the most exciting ways in which science and technology have merged, namely through what has become known as nanotechnology. While it may be true to say that many inventions in the world of technology have been large-scale, nanotechnology proves that it's possible that what is bigger will not necessarily be best. For nanotechnology involves the science and ability to create something extremely small using computer and electronic technology. If we look back at the past, we see the pocket watch as an example of this. And in its day, this watch was much admired, something small that could fit into a pocket and yet still function as well as a larger-sized watch or clock. Of course, to find a more recognisable starting point for nanotechnology, we need to look at the world of electronics. Certainly, electronics clearly showed that smaller was better. In fact, the smaller the electronic gadget, the more effective and useful it is. Now, those of you who attended my lecture on electronics last week will remember that I spoke about how earlier radio technology was quite awkward and difficult to operate. Then, after World War II, the transistor was developed, which changed the face of radio. This involved a series of electronic switches that could be placed on a board no bigger than a postage stamp. This meant that an entire electronic circuit could be built in a much smaller area. Naturally, this was not only faster, but it also saved space and, more importantly, energy. For those of you who are interested in the transistor, come speak to me afterwards and I'll give you a copy of my handouts from last week. But moving on with the subject of today's talk, the development of the electronic chip meant that we began to use terms like microchip, and in doing so place importance on its size being vastly smaller. But as this form of microtechnology developed and literally became smaller, the word micro, meaning 1 millionth, was replaced with the word nano, which literally means 1 billionth. There were pessimists who doubted whether a transistor that small would actually work properly, but they were proved wrong, and in a modern transistor, what is known as the gate length, or distance the electrons have to travel, is only about 40 nanometers. I'm sure you will agree this is unbelievably tiny, and not only that, the electrons can travel incredibly fast. And as scientists continue to develop these transistors, there is every chance that they may become even smaller. Of course, one of the problems with developments and designs in technology is that they must not only be practical, but also affordable. So it might be that companies will not continue supporting nanotechnology if it turns out to be too expensive to produce in the long term. But one area where there has been major improvements is medicine, where nanotechnology is being used to fight life-threatening diseases like cancer. Recently, an American university discovered that nanotechnology can be used to help make systems that supply drugs to the body. A quick way to make sure drugs enter the body is by making artificial molecules. These are in the shape of a star and are small enough to go into cells and release the drugs. In this new system, the molecule is made of 2 star shapes, connected by a strand of DNA. Each shape is roughly 3 to 4 nanometers long. At one end, the star molecule will enter the diseased cell, while at the other end there is a tracking device, which is fluorescent so that it can light up when it has reached a diseased cell. It is hoped that this will be a more effective way to fight diseases. But we must not forget that dangers will always exist in the world of technological changes. One I'd like to focus on is as yet unproven and is still the subject of much speculation. It involves the idea that a molecular machine could be built using something called an assembler. This means one machine would make another machine, but of course these machines would be operated by people. However, some scientists are concerned that there is a real future possibility these machines could replicate themselves and so no longer be controlled by human beings. But while anything in the world of chemistry is probable, I think it's highly unlikely that we could ever develop a machine capable of replicating itself. Still, if anything, it shows that nanoparticles, like any technology, should be carefully and constantly monitored. Next week, I will be looking at nanotechnology and recent developments in the field of molecular biology. I hope that you will be able to join me then.
Track 18. 1.
It's on the table.
2.
Your phone is on the table.
3.
Your mobile phone is on the table.
4.
You haven't lost your phone. It's on the table.
Track 19. 1.
The bicycle is a great way to get regular exercise, and it's much better for the environment.
2.
The Internet began as part of the United States military network, but it later began to be used by businesses and academic institutions.
3.
Nanotechnology has crept into many areas of our lives.
4.
Scientists are concerned that there's a real possibility that these machines could replicate themselves.
5.
Next week, I'll be looking at nanotechnology and recent developments in the field of molecular biology.
Track 20.
Good morning, Language Resource Centre. How can I help you?
Hi, I've just registered to do a postgraduate degree, and I was wondering how I go about joining the Resource Centre.
OK, the first thing you need to do is come in and bring some form of identification with you.
You mean like my driving license?
Well, actually, we prefer you to bring in something from your university registration. Students have in the past used their passports, but we really do prefer you to bring in your student card with your ID number.
OK.
This should be on the front of the card and begins with the letters BNP, followed by a number.
OK, that's no problem. And could you tell me what facilities you offer in the centre?
Certainly. We have a range of books, although not as extensive as the library, of course. Still, you'll find that we do stock some of the books on your reading list, particularly for postgraduate level. The undergraduate students usually find that the main library caters better for their needs.
That's good to hear, because I was worried about not being able to find the books on the reading list, especially if more than one student wants to use the same book. I find that really frustrating.
We are aware of this, and it's precisely because of this that we've got a special system whereby you can borrow books, but only on a short loan basis.
Oh, and how long is that?
There are two types of short loan books. One is a 2-day loan, but the other one is for a single day and must be brought back the next day. We have to be really strict with this kind of loan, so there is quite a heavy fine if you don't bring it back.
Of course, I hope I'm not going to be in that situation, but can you tell me anyway how much it is?
Sure, it's £1.75 for a 1-day loan and £1 for a 2-day loan. Then it's 50 pence a day on top of that.
50 pence for each extra day?
Yes, until you return the book. It sounds steep, but it's really for the student's benefit. You said yourself that it can be annoying not being able to find books you need.
OK, fair enough. I presume you also have journals?
Oh yes, we have a wide range of academic journals, and many of these are available online.
Fantastic. Can I access these from outside the college?
Yes, you can, but you need to register for this. You can do this when you come in. Basically, you need your student ID again, and we give you an internet password, which you can then change if you like. Most students do because it's easier for them to memorize.
I'll definitely do that. I'm hopeless at remembering passwords, so the only way I can remember one is if I make it up myself.
Now, you will also find reading lists online as well as where to find the books, so this means you won't have to waste time trying to find books you need.
That's really good to know. Knowing exactly where to go to find a book is such a time saver.
We also have a special page which gives you links to other university libraries, so if we don't have the book, we can help you get it.
Is that any other university library?
No, it's just the ones that have joined. It's known as the Inter-University Library Loan System. But you'll find when you go to the web page that quite a few universities have joined, and it's growing all the time.
What a great idea. I mean, not only to be able to get books, but just to be given the opportunity to exchange ideas with students on other campuses.
I quite agree. Oh, and you'll also see when you come in that we have a wide selection of videos you can borrow. These range from films to actual lectures and seminars that have been videoed, so students have the opportunity to watch them again if they need to, or if for some reason they were not able to attend. And it's pretty much standard that we video visiting lecturers.
And are these also available on tape?
Yes, they are. And also on CD.
Great.
Actually, having said that, we don't put all our lectures and seminars on CD, except visiting speakers. Their talks are always put on both, so you can choose either.
This all sounds fantastic. I never realized there was so much on offer.
Yes, we're very proud of our Learning Resource Centre, and the university has given extra funding to make sure we can keep all our resources up to date.
Track 21.
I know you mentioned online books and journals. How many computers does the Resource Centre have?
Oh, we have a lot of computers. Basically, there are 3 floors and we have computers on each one. But these are only for searching for the books or articles you may need. They cannot be used for anything else.
Oh, I see. So they're really just search engines. And how do you use them?
Well, there are a number of ways you can do this. You can use the author's name, but I'm not talking about the first name. Only the surname will work, so you need to know the correct spelling.
That sounds quite straightforward. And what are the other ways?
Well, you can also do a keyword search, which means typing in a keyword from the title of the book. That's for when you're not sure of the title.
Okay.
But when you do this, you will obviously get a list of books that have this word in the title.
In a way, getting a book list like this is really an advantage because it can give you ideas about what other books to read.
That's true, but just bear in mind that it takes a little bit longer. Of course, you can also type in a subject keyword, and then you'll be given a list of authors and titles around that subject. The final way is, of course, by keying in the name of the book. And don't forget there's an information desk, so you can always ask someone if you need help.
Where is that?
You'll find the help desk on the ground floor.
Great. And are there any other computers to use generally for checking emails and things like that?
Yes, there is a computer centre in the basement, but we prefer students to use these computers more for study purposes, so please don't spend all your time doing things like checking your emails, and you most definitely cannot use it to play computer games. If you were caught doing this, you will be banned from using our computers for 2 weeks. Oh, no, sorry, because of all the problems we had with this last year, this has now been increased to 3.
Whoa, 1 week without a computer would be too much for me.
Oh, but please don't worry, because when you first come, we'll give you a tour of the library and show you how everything works. Do you know where we are?
Track 22.
Thanks for seeing me today. I've been really worried about my mid-year assignment.
Yes, me too. I feel much the same way as Gabriella does.
Yes, I realised that. And thanks for sending me your first drafts. I've had a look at them, and there are a few things that need revisiting.
I guessed you'd probably say that.
Right. Let's start at the beginning. You both had different problems, so I'll speak to each of you in turn. Let's start with you, Gabriella. Tell me, what did you hope to achieve with this assignment?
Okay. Well, I suppose my main idea was really to look at the news.
Can you be more specific?
Well, my main focus was really news values. I mean, how do presenters and broadcasters, people like that, actually decide what is newsworthy?
Mm-hmm.
And as much as I'd have liked to have studied TV news, I had to make the choice between television and the newspapers, and I chose the latter.
Fine. Now, that did come across in your introduction, but I wonder if the scope of your essay was too wide. You did try and include an awful lot.
I was afraid of that. I spent ages reading newspapers and trying to choose the right items, but it's really difficult to know what to include and what to leave out.
Well, shall we look at it together and see if we can make the focus of your essay more specific?
Mm-hmm.
Many students find it hard to know what information to select, especially when they read a lot.
It would really help me to see where I've gone wrong so I don't repeat this mistake again.
Okay. Now, here in paragraph 1, you focus on the negativity in the news.
Yes. I was trying to highlight the fact that really the general public will usually choose bad news above good. They seem to like it more because bad news sells. It makes headlines. We like reading about disasters and tragedy.
That's true, but I think what you did not explain enough was why this is the case. Is it something in human nature, or is it just that this is how we've become accustomed to receiving news? I thought maybe you could have given some examples here, maybe compared 2 newspapers, a broadsheet and a tabloid perhaps, to look at how they presented a particular negative piece of news. Was it dramatised, for example? Which one was more sensationalistic?
Ah, yes, I can think of so many examples of that. I mean, you can really see the dramatic effect in an item of news in the pictures that go with the story.
Right. Now you're getting the idea.
Do you think I did the same thing in the second paragraph?
Actually, I thought you'd organised this much better. It was clearer. I like the way you mentioned the value of continuity in the news. Continuity is important because, quite obviously, the longer an item of news lasts, the more people will buy the newspaper because they're interested in what is happening. Your example of war was a good one because most wars last a while, so the story will stay in the news.
But I also wanted to explain how readers can lose interest in a news story, and that was really my main emphasis.
Yes, I really liked that part of your paragraph. It showed you'd really thought about what you'd read and had the confidence to add your own ideas. The rest of your essay, apart from a few minor grammar mistakes, was fine.
And what about mine?
Well, the first few paragraphs were really good, clearly constructed and easy to follow. But I don't think you did this as well in the third paragraph. What were you trying to get across?
I was trying to explain about celebrities, what is defined in news terms as the personality angle. The fact that we are, interested in stories about famous people.
Sure, but I think you need to focus on what this means for the news. What about looking at how newspapers often publish popular news stories and how this might go against the news attempting to be neutral?
So what you are saying is the news is meant to be objective, but actually it isn't really?
Certainly. I'm saying you should try and make more comparisons between the objectivity and subjectivity and see which way the news usually tends to go.
Would you suggest I take a particular news item and compare the way two newspapers report on it?
That would be an excellent idea. In fact, you could even use some of the ideas from your first paragraph. Maybe take a so-called bad news story.
That's a good idea, and I could use the same newspapers.
Yes, but you could also look at two other newspapers with similar styles, maybe another tabloid and broadsheet.
I like that idea.
I also felt maybe you could have included the idea of recent news, because this links in with what you've already said.
I don't quite understand.
Well, I'm referring to the idea that newspapers try and get scoops, any big story that has recently happened. You could link this to your first paragraph. And even your second.
The public is really interested in what is happening now rather than what is old news.
And you could bring in the effect of technology on the news at this point. It has affected news reporting and publishing tremendously. If you think about it, the internet has meant that news can be much more immediate than before. So, for example, as something is happening, it could be reported and published in a paper.
Oh, yes. I remember reading once about an earthquake, and just before the building collapsed, someone at the top sent an email to a newspaper. I mean, this just proves that at the click of a button, we can communicate so much more quickly than before.
Yes, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, but just make sure that you have evidence to support what you say.
Track 23.
Do you often use a library?
I think I try to use library about, maybe once or twice a week.
Okay. And are libraries popular in your country?
Yes. Libraries are very popular. Yes, they have always been popular in my country.
Do you think people will still visit libraries in 10 years' time?
No. I think this probably won't happen. I can't say for certain, but I think probably not.
Track 24.
Do you often use a library?
Oh, yes. Using library all the time. No one can really live without a library because we're needing it for many things, like education and also to broaden our minds.
Right. And are libraries popular in your country?
Oh, yes. I can definitely say that library is extremely important for many people in my country. We have long history of books and, yes, I think it's true to say that people in my country likes reading. In fact, they probably very much likes to reading.
Do you think people will still visit libraries in, say, 10 years' time?
Well, no one can really say what the future holds, but I think, yes, we will still go. Even though some people, they say internet will stopping people from reading. But I think there will always be people who prefer the books.
IELTS Graduation by Mark Allen, Deborah Powell and Dickie Dolby. Published by Macmillan Education, a division of Macmillan Publishers Limited. Copyright Macmillan Publishers Limited, 2007.